It's Dennis Jai, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. In our topic tonight, we're going to be looking at corruption and human rights in Liberia. My guest, the former chairman of the Liberian Anti-Corruption Commission, Mr. James N. Verdier. Mr. Verdier, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you very much, my brother. It's good to be here, and I greet your audience wherever they are in good faith and wish them Merry Christmas, and we look forward to a happy and prosperous New Year.
Thank you so much, Councillor Verdier. We are glad to have you for almost the first time on Focus on Liberia. The last time you were here, it was kind of halfway to the end of the show. So in a special way, we want to say welcome to our broadcast, and we are glad to have you. I also want to welcome the anti-money laundering guru. He's a member here. He co-hosts FOL Marketplace. He's the former director of the Financial Intelligence Unit of Liberia, Mr. Alexander Cuffy. Alex, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you, Dennis. And also, I just want to greet the audience, the people who are listening to this at this moment and who will be listening to it afterwards, and also those who will be making their comments and contribution to the program today. Thank you, Dennis, for having me.
Thank you so much. We are glad to have you. Again, this is Focus on Liberia Primetime Sunday. We are talking about corruption. At the beginning of the show, we played a song by Sister Miata Famule, The Big C, that's corruption. You eat some, I eat some, that's corruption. And so we're going to be talking about corruption. And let me start, Mr. Councillor Verdier, let me again welcome you. Let's start by saying, what is corruption from the perspective of the Liberian Anti-Corruption Commission, and also corruption the way people look at it in Liberia? What's corruption?
Okay, thank you again, Mr. Jai, and I want to greet my friend and brother, Mr. Alexander Cuffy, who I have multiple professional relationships and links to. Corruption in terms of the Liberian government's interpretation or the NACC working document is any act of decision in the use of public resources by a public official, disregarding laid down rules and responsibilities, intended to benefit that individual instead of a public benefit, really. So converting public resources or public office into achieving or satisfying personal desire. So it can be interference with other responsibility. It can be converting financial resources. It can be abuse of public office in different ways. All of those things constitute corruption. And even private persons can also be involved in corruption once they are making use of public space and public resources, to achieve personal desires. Basically, that's what corruption is. In the layman term, if something is given to you that is not for you, is entrusted to you for safekeeping, or for you to utilize in making sure it brings good to the Liberian people, to the Liberian government, and you turn around and use it for your personal use, for your personal gain. If you interfere with somebody's office to get your brother or your sister extra job, extra money, once you're not supposed to do that, something that you gotta look over your shoulder for, those kind of things constitute corruption.
I like that. Mr. Cuffy, Transparency International says corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. I like that, right? Entrusted power for private gain. So it's kind of cut across. It's everywhere. From someone who, FIU, the FBI for money in Liberia. What is corruption? And give us some examples that you see.
So in your own term, talking about the Transparency International, you got something simple called abuse of power, right? So abuse of power, say when you are what we call a politically exposed person, that is to say you occupy a prominent public office. For example, you are an appointed person. So in Liberia case, from assistant minister up to ministers, some directors, chairman of different managing director of different, and in fact, certain ranking officials in the military or in political organizations in different facets of life as defined in our law. If you utilize your office for your personal gains, then it's corruption. But in the terms of money laundering, corruption is also converting monies which is not for your use, is for the public use, or is for the government taking that money and trying to convert it to your personal use using obscure methods to make sure that that money is not traced to you. That money that did not belong to you is not your salary or that property. Or sometimes even the instrumentality, that is the method as far as even car or anything you use to convert that money to your personal use. It's called corruption. And corruption is a predicate offense. It's one of the predicate offense in addition to fraud for money laundering. And according to the studies, according to the risk assessment that was done in Liberia before I left, is one of the it's probably the number one prevalent predicate offense for money laundering in Liberia. There are two more: there are corruption, fraud, there's drug trafficking, and there is tax evasion. But corruption plays a major role.
Right. So you say drug trafficking, the other one, they are not corruption.
But drug trafficking, any offense that is committed to gain money,
Right.
it's a predicate offense for money laundering, and there are 21 categories. Prevalent in Liberia, there are about 9 of them, according to the studies that was conducted. There are about 9 of them. But the 3 most highest are those that I mentioned: corruption, drug trafficking, tax evasion.
Tax evasion.
So those things, when you trade drug to get money.
Right.
When you steal, okay, it's one of them too. When you steal to get money, all right. When you commit tax evasion, is to kind of refuse to pay your legitimate taxes from income you earn through business or other means. So that is money you're taking from the table for public use.
Right.
So it's an offense for money laundering because you're trying to obscure the original source of that money so that you will not be caught because you've committed a crime.
Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, this is focused on Liberia. Our topic today, corruption and human rights. For the benefit of my audience, I want each of you to tell me, because you know about corruption, not that you are corrupt. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you work in areas close to corruption. So describe for me or tell me a little bit about what you do, in line with that make you to come close to see what corruption is. Let me start with Councillor Verdier again. Tell me what you know about corruption when it comes to Liberia based on your work, and describe your work and what you did that open your eyes to corruption in Liberia.
Well, first, my involvement in different facets of activities, from community development to human rights, and then to development, economic development programs, and then to anti-corruption. I serve as a national director of the Catholic Justice and Peace Commission, which is a major human rights advocacy group, in Liberia. And so we're engaged in confronting political leaders of the country at land for human rights abuses and providing alternative on how people can respect human rights. When I discuss corruption, I also discuss human rights because corruption is also a human rights issue, But I got directly involved with acts of corruption when I headed the Liberian Anti-Corruption Commission from 2014 all the way to 2019, and when my tenure expired. So at that level, we were part of investigations, we're part of providing authority, issuing authority to investigate people, issuing, providing requests to arrest people, based on allegation of corruption and all of that. And basically, what we were looking at the time from the LACC level, we were actually heavily involved with grand corruption and some petty corruption as well, involving high government officials converting resources, public resources for their personal use, abuse of offices, looking at the police and what they do, those kind of things. Well, take for example, if you have a police officer who is a traffic officer on the street who extort or money from passenger or from drivers and threaten to jail, and that's corruption. If you have a public official who converts a huge amount of money that is entrusted to him or her and convert that money to his or her personal use, that's corruption. So sometimes we just categorize corruption as petty and grand corruption based on the amount involved and the level of the individuals who are involved.
And also private and public, because can people outside of government or outside of position of power also be corrupt? If yes, what are some of the examples?
Definitely, private individuals can be corrupt, but it's tough. Some people find difficulty in delineating the two. When a private individual in his private business come in contact with public resources, with public office, and engage in activities and conduct that are wrong, then that's corruption. Okay, and then when public officials also in their official duty also engage private citizens, and they mismanage public resources, and they also abuse their office based on the intervention or the interruption of different processes, can be corruption. Take for example, you have businessmen, businesswomen who look for business deal from government, from the Ministry of Finance, look for contracts and all of that. That relationship can lead to corruption based on how you tender your bid, how you got the contract, what resources you're using. All of those kind of things can lead to corruption. And then public officials too, in an attempt to engage private citizens into business there's some functions that you do as public official, you have to come in contact with private citizens, who will look for contracts. We engage different government agencies for certain reasons. And once you're using public resources, the issue of corruption comes up. But if you have two private persons, non-government official, two private persons interacting and dealing, then that will not constitute corruption. That would be civil action because both of them have recourse to the law through civil action. But corruption comes in when public resources, public office is involved. Once the public interest is involved, then we look at the issue of corruption.
Is that, and Mr. Cuffy, you can comment, is that corruption on the LACC level? Because, like, for instance, every time we talk about corruption, someone would tell me, oh, corruption is everywhere, like President Cllr said, corruption is everywhere, even in the home. If you send money to your brother to build you a house and they take the money, that's corruption. If somebody in Liberia call and lie, say, oh, I'm at the point of death, even though they are having fun, and then you send them money, they take that to go on the beach, that's corruption. So are these forms of corruption, or it has to involve public resources?
So let me add that, if you can hear me. So I wrote an article sometime back, and I tried to define corruption. So in that article, I said on one of the hand, corruption is the act of impairing integrity. virtue, or moral principle. So you can even be in the church. So what impairs your integrity? What impairs your virtue or your moral principle? On the other hand, corruption is the abuse of public office for private gains. And in that stage, it includes embezzlement, nepotism, bribery, extortion, influence peddling, and fraud. So you don't have to be in government. You can also be in the private sector and commit the act of fraud. Influence peddling, extortion, the definition of extortion. So if you extort something from somebody, even though it is outside of government, even though it's a civil situation, it's a person-to-person act, you'll stay extorted. So that's corruption. Bribery.
How do you get recourse under the law if you have two private persons and one person accused of corruption? How do you get recourse under the law? We look at criminal action. When two private persons engage and there's something, for example, in the church, like you're talking about, yes, somebody can be corrupt in the church because you know what? The resources of the church is not just personal, it's a public thing. The churches have a whole group of people going there. So that's a public thing. But if you have two private persons, how can you accuse another person of corruption? And stealing is indeed. When we look at the level of theft and the level of embezzlement. Embezzlement also, if you define embezzlement, it has to do with diverting huge amount of resources for the public and not basically private. So if you send the money that Jaro was mentioning, if you send money to your relative in Liberia to pay your house, and the relative steals the money, you charge him for corruption, how are you going to prosecute that person? You can't prosecute. You have a recourse to take that person on a civil action. Okay,
so
you can't prosecute them for corruption. Yeah, so you can't prosecute them for corruption.
You charge them for stealing, not corruption.
Yes. So in our law, Counselor, in our law, we got something called stolen goods, right? That's stealing. That's what we're talking about. So, but on the flip side, if you and somebody were involved in the money, in a contract or in a deal for money, and you fraudulently force the person's signature to get that money, that is fraud. And under this definition, fraud is a form of corruption.
That constitutes corruption. That would be a crime. Fraud is a crime.
Yeah. And
so that would constitute corruption. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I'm talking about. So on the civil side, on the person-to-person, yes, a criminal act can be undertaken by somebody, by a private citizen who don't necessarily have to be in government. So a private-to-private situation can also breed corruption. So that's the point I was trying to drive at.
So
on that instance, on a Liberian law, you cannot prosecute that person for corruption, because to prosecute that person, you have to report the case to the state. For it to constitute a criminal act, the state will have to take that action. You understand what I'm saying? So that person cannot be prosecuted for corruption.
And I want to get fraud now. So fraud is a branch of corruption. So they will charge the person with fraud, and they don't have to take the person to LHCC. The police and the Ministry of Justice, prosecution can have jurisdiction over that case if it's a state matter. But if it's a personal matter, then the person can go straight to whichever court that has jurisdiction over fraud cases.
You know how I've been looking at it? I've been looking at any form of dishonesty has corruption. Am I wrong?
I mean, anything that brings your moral character into question, can be deemed corrupt, But from my perspective, whether that person can be prosecuted, for that particular action, at what level. But you're right. Look, corruption has to do with a bad character. Anything for which you got to look over your shoulder. When it comes to honesty, when it comes to trust, when it comes to deception, and it comes to truth. It's the whole idea of trust, making sure that you are a good custodian or something that is entrusted to you. And that thing can be an office, the way you utilize your office. You don't necessarily have to use finances to be corrupt. Abuse of office. And you know that all of these things have always been on our political instability in Liberia. Whenever we have an issue, people go to election, they talk about corruption, they talk about abuse of office, and all of that. So corruption takes different facets. It has different facets, but at the end of the day, it has a very, very big implication on our country, from political to economic situations. We have very, very big implications, and that's what we need to try to understand. How do we actually fight this thing and to reduce our vulnerability, and for us to imbue some progress, economic as well as infrastructural progress in Liberia.
So what are the different forms or types or categories of corruption? And you earlier talked about petty corruption and grand corruption. Is there a threshold to say, well, this qualify for corruption based on this amount of money the person has stolen, or based on a particular threshold?
Yeah, definitely. There's some cases involving millions of dollars. There's some cases involving hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the other cases involving $20. Those amounts can actually determine what is grand corruption. And there's some acts of corruption that are in a syndicate. You understand? It's a pattern involving multiple agencies over a long period of time. Huge amount of money, millions and millions of dollars are siphoned from government coffers, through these kind of syndicates. That's grand corruption. Petty corruption is just basically, people at a very lower scale. $500, $1,000, maybe $10,000, $50,000, but there's much bigger amount. The grand corruption will constitute cases involving huge contract. People bidding for construction work, people bidding for to purchase huge materials, government equipment, caterpillars, and those kind of big grand corruption. The FIU also, I think they did some work in categorizing and those kind of things. I think Ellis can expand on that, but basically that's what it is. It just describes the petty and grand. Actually look at the amount, the value of the interest there, what is involved, what's the amount involved, what's the value of this thing that involved to determine whether it's grand or petty.
Mr. Cuffy, and you can add to that, because I see the FIU is like you sit all the way up there and look at this, not just on the petty level, but even on the international level. You see outside, what's coming from outside, coming in and all that. From your experience, what is the level of corruption have you seen?
So just to hone in on what we started, we're talking about moral principles and virtues and inherent integrity. So there's the soft side and there's a hard side, the criminal side. So the fact that your moral principle is impaired is in itself, but I mean, nobody takes you to court for impairing your moral principle or things like that, or maybe there's a civil matter involved in that. But on the criminal side of things, so for example, we talk about embezzlement, right? So that embezzlement is the act of taking, for lack of a better word, stealing government money and properties and other assets that are entrusted to you, as a public official or anybody for that matter, taking, and that's embezzlement. The act of nepotism, that is employing family members and those things that we talk about over and over, is corruption, is a bribery, where you take money to influence a contract or to give contract or to even process somebody's papers and things like that, where you take a bribe. It in itself is corruption, and where government officials take bribe to influence situation is corruption in a sense. So, at the FIU level, internationally, predicate offenses, right? And predicate offense in this case is something that you commit, a crime that is committed to get money, all right? So we look at these things on a broader scale, on an international scale. So, yes, we have an FIU in Liberia. We have an FIU in almost all the countries in the world. So we work in together. So corruption being a predicate offense for money laundering, what we do is we follow the money. All right. The FIU normally on anti-money laundering, you follow the money so that when you follow the money, whether monies that are moved, across borders, or monies that are placed in the banking system and transfer, and there are different methodologies, there are different indicators that are used. Once we follow the money, we do an investigation in different ways. Now, we have, from a FIU, preliminary investigation or analysis point of view, you have to now narrow on which crime this person trying to hide this money, which crime has the person committed. Has the person committed corruption? Has the person committed tax evasion, drug trafficking, or any of the other 21 categories of predicate offense? Once we can determine that, then we can do what we call reporting that to the institution that takes jurisdiction, that has jurisdiction over that. So in this case, if it's corruption, right? If it's embezzlement, for example, that case will be forwarded to the LACC for LACC to conduct its investigation, and probably that case might go to court through the Justice Ministry or directly. And Mr. Verdier can speak to that about their 90 days and all that stuff. When it has to do with tax evasion, then it's forwarded to the Liberia Revenue Authority for them to investigate further. Now, in that case, the state will ask the FIU for continual cooperation so that the FIU can continue to cooperate with them and provide them with additional information, assuming maybe it has to do with taking information from another country or taking information from a financial institution. So the FIU at that point will serve as a supporting arm to ensure that that case goes to court.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia Primetime Sunday. Our discussion today, corruption and human rights. Mr. Verdier, Councillor Verdier, let me come back to you. For the sake of our discussion tonight, we're going to talk about the corruption that the LACC looks at, which we define as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain that the Transparency International talk about, so that we can narrow our scope to that. So now my question to you is, first of all, give us a little background about the LACC and what was it like working for the LACC?
Well, thank you. Look, I think to enrich our discussion, I probably just want to take us further back into our own political and economic history. I'm talking about Liberia and how the issue of corruption has been with Liberia from its founding. And I think this should also highlight the need for us to really fight this whole thing of corruption head to toe. I think in 1822, when land was acquired, the land acquisition in Liberia, I think it was also acquired on fraudulent means, because the agents of American Colonization Society said they paid for the land, whereas other studies show that the natives, were actually induced, were compelled, were coerced to surrender the land. So they got the land, under those kind of means. And then later on, in 1847, there was a government established, the country declared its independence, and went back as far back as 1871. You will know that history also tells us that there was a change of government. Some call it a coup d'etat, and some say E.J. Raw was actually removed from office because of corruption. There was a loan that was obtained from a British financial institution, and they accused E.J. Raw of squandering, misusing that money. So the story is that he ran and he was actually in a boat that capsized, and they said it was because the money he was taking with him, that caused the boat to capsize. And other stories say the mulatto were indifferent to having a Negro, red, black president, and so we had that issue. And back in 1926, the legislature passed a law that empowered the government to actually grant Firestone, B.F. Goodrich, this big 99 acres of land for production of rubber and all that kind of thing. But under that it was going to provide an avenue for the government to borrow $5 million also, to help save Liberia from its economic woes at the time. And when that loan was granted, before the loan actually hit Liberia, more than 60% of the loan was gone, having distributed among government officials. That was as far back as 1926, And then you also know that in 1927, there were these general elections in which President C.D.B. King won, and you had just 15,000 voters, eligible voters, 15,000 people, and then when the election results were announced, C.D.B. King won with almost 250,000, and T.J. Faulkner, his opponent, won with 9,000. That issue again, you see what corruption was done. And that led T.J. Faulkner to actually raise some concern and try to expose the issue of forced labor crisis in Liberia. So he went to the United States and reported that the Liberian government was engaged in modern day slavery, and that's why. And the reason why he said that, because C.D.B. King government, what they did when they found out that they were facing a very tough tax, they went and got the chiefs from the different hinterland communities. The chiefs came and they allowed they made the chiefs to vote, and those chiefs, one person was voting for all his constituents. If a chief had 11,000 people or 5,000 in his clan or in his town, once he voted, it represented 5,000 people or 9,000 people. So C.D.B. King came up to the figure of 250 or 260,000. That's the issue of corruption. Because of the investigation of the financial labor crisis, C.D.B. King was forced to resign because the League of Nations was not able to pursue further, but they actually determined that there was some semblance of forced labor, modern day slavery. C.D.B. King had to resign because of that. And so this issue of corruption has been with Liberia from the time we were born. Back in the 1970s, when President Douglas was president, he actually established a bureau that he referred to as the National Bureau for the Eradication of Corruption. That to attach this whole corruption thing to. We found that our leaders have been inherently corrupt throughout in our history. When the coup took place in 1980, one of the primary reasons for the coup was corruption. The coup leaders said rampant corruption, they called it, for many other things, abuse of office and rampant corruption, they did that. And you also remember that it was during the having Jones tenure as finance minister that one public official from the Ministry of Finance was publicly flogged for corruption. I think on Broad Street. He was flogged publicly. Whatever laws they used, how they investigated him, but they were basically trying to say this is something we not tolerate. And they did that. So this thing has been with us for time immemorial. What is happening now is that we don't seem to be succeeding in the way that we desire, because it looks like the population, the citizenry, are not getting on board as they should. So somebody once said to me, you look at any government official, our government is a mirror of the people. So if you have people coming into government who are rogues, they are actually mirroring what the greater society is. So it brings our character into strong disrepute and under the mirror. We need to look at it, because all of the people who come to office and are stealing, for example, in the current government, people who are within 2 or 3 months, people are building estates, who are building mansions that they did not build for 22 years, they could not build. But in 3 months, they are amassing a whole lot of fun. Where are these people coming from? They're coming from right within our community. So that is something that we as Liberians have to look at and to attack. We have to attack it with dignity, we have to attack it with courage, so that we'll be able to succeed. And so this brings me to the point where when President Ellen Johnson said he became president, she basically declared corruption, Liberia public enemy #1. And to address this, along with the international community that were interested in supporting Liberia, making sure that Liberia can bounce back come back on its feet to revive Liberia economically. He said, look, one of the conditions for us to support you is that you have to take a serious step toward, you have to take a very serious step towards investigating corruption and prosecuting people for that. And that was one of the conditions in terms of reforming Liberia and taking Liberia through recovery from war and all of that. And so the LACC Act was established, finally, was passed in 2007, and then it was actually printed in 2008 and became law. So the LACC was established in 2008 to address some of these issues of corruption. But again, in the LACC law, if you take a close look at it, which we did a lot of time, you will see that
and Councillor Verdier, before you come to the LACC law, so the LACC was not established out of the need of fighting corruption. It was just to fulfill what the international community wanted to see. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, I think it was a combination. I think the pressure for the international community may have hastened it, but there was a need to do. I think the government at the time expressed interest in doing that, but I think the pressure from the international community that was responsible for funding our recovery also mentioned that. Also, in the cross peace plan, when we're talking about we're negotiating peace with Liberia, something like that was mentioned. So it was a combination of factors that led to the establishment of the LACC and to re-strengthen the General Auditing Commission. As you know, the General Auditing Commission is already mentioned in the Constitution, or was already mentioned, but there were other forces that propelled reviewing the General Auditing Law to strengthen it. Okay, so
right, and I will come back to you because I want us to dwell on this one a little bit, because to me, what was happening at that time, and Mr. Cuffy, you can come in, because other integrity institutions were established, right? And to me, it seems like President Salih just wanted a check mark to be qualified for international money. So Mr. Cuffy, because FIU and all these different institutions, it was like she was just looking to see, which one will make Liberia to get money, and let's just set it up just for the sake of fulfilling what the international community wants. Mr. Cuffy, your take.
Yeah, Dennis, that's a good point. And I must say that we as a country, all right, and I'm not pointing at any government particularly, because the corruption issue is something that has gone on from 1847 or even before 1847 to today.
Right. So, anytime we say corruption, like we are excusing the local leaders, those chiefs too were corrupt.
Corruption has been a thing that has existed, that has permeated the fabric of our society since Jack was a pup to today. All right. Now, but it seems as though, and I'm taking a jab at some of the comments I read there. It seems as though we established this institution, then we turn around and stab the institutions in the back. We established this institution because we want to fulfill some checklist, or we want to fulfill some pressure from the international community, or from people that are funding, or we want to fulfill some of these things because we are part of the Committee of Nations and we just came from an international meeting, whether be it OAU or be it ECOWAS meeting, and we are mandated by virtue of signing on to some of these international treaties that we have to establish these organizations. For example, even though the FIU is supposed to exist in all, every country, it's like some pressure had to be put to bear on the country to establish the FIU, like the GAC, like the LACC. Most of these, at the certain time after the war, when we had a new government in 2005, 2006, it's like we were holding this checklist. We had GMAP in the country, so GMAP said we should do this, we did it. Or the World Bank said we should do this, otherwise they will not give us this money, we do it. All right. But when the institutions sit down, like how a country is, let me add the word, a serious country will operate. We turn around and stab these organizations in the back. They do their work.
For example, the FIU does all its work. It takes all the pressure and tension to do its work. Even on the case of a grave situation like terrorism, I will not even come to LACC or LRA. Terrorism, which is very grave, you follow the money and you report a case which is a potential either terrorists is being supported or money is passing through the country, which has the potential to go and support terrorist organization. You pass that information, that report onto the proper organization, the security organization, and they literally do nothing. Or they pretend to be doing some work, and once other things happen, they drop it. Or they pass it on to prosecution, and at that level, it stops there. Right? So, for all you know, the FIU, the LACC, the GSC may be doing their work, but it reached to some place, it has a bottleneck. It gets stuck. Because if you look at the corruption situation, right, or fraud or whatever, you have to have the institutions, you have to, you have the legal framework, you have the laws, and Liberia has the laws. You have the institutional framework. That is the institution, the FIU, the LACC, the GSC, you have those institutions, the PPCC, you have those institutions. Okay? So they got something called technical compliance. So we are technically compliant. In fact, that's why we continue to pass the corruption on the thing we feel in these few days. What's that stuff? The Millennium Challenge, right? That's why we continue to pass it, because we are technically compliant. Technical compliance means you have the law, you have the institution, okay? But fortunately, we are not compliant because it doesn't start with the institutions. It doesn't start with the law. It also include resourcing these organizations, right, so that they can do their work. It also, on the value chain, it also have cases. How many cases left the FIU, went to the LACC, went to the LRA? How many cases left the LACC and the LRA that went to the prosecution? Court. How many cases prosecution took to court? How many guilty verdict or acquittal happened? Out of the guilty verdict, how many people served a sentence, or how many people were made to restitute, or how many property were confiscated? That's the end game. And if you're not there, then you're not compliant. You're only technically compliant. You're not compliant.
True.
So the institutions doing their work, but somewhere down the line, it filters.
Right. And that brings me to Councillor Verdier on the challenges, the difficulty, and the successes of the LACC you shared.
And they're enormous, you know. So the LACC has this whole chain of responsibilities, and the LACC is supposed to investigate, the LACC is supposed to educate, and the LACC is supposed to administer, you know, the whole issue of the Anti-Corruption Commission, and suggest to the executive how or what kind of laws to put in place and all of that. But like Alex mentioned, this was a very, very serious matter. Sometimes the support for the institution until certain persons are involved or certain cases are encountered. Then you see that officials of government, and I mean, including up to the office of the president and other high government officials, will begin to do things to frustrate this effort and make sure that it doesn't happen. So it requires commitment, not just on the paper that Alex talked about. Technically, we have a lot of integrity institutions in place, but how functional are they? These institutions are stifled for funding. They're stifled in terms of manpower. They're not granted access. Some officials, government officials, make it very difficult for LACC agents to actually have access to documents and to have access to people. You got to insist on that, you know. So while we were there during our tenure from 2014, because I was actually nominated in November 2013, but actually took over finally were confirmed already in 2014. From 2014 to 2019, I can tell you, look, we did what we thought was necessary. We experienced a lot of bottlenecks, but we were able to break grounds. We were able to break some barriers. For example, the LCC existed in 2008 to 2013. LCC did not really arrest people at the time. When I got there, looking at the laws, we started to issue a lot of arrests. We made some very prominent arrests, which I'm sure you are aware of. We arrested a sitting representative. We arrested the senators. We arrested people who were involved in cases that we investigated. So we were able to break some barriers. We were also able to actually find some people guilty during our tenure. For example, I always mention that the case involving the former police director Monassi and others who had this $900,000 for uniform thing. We actually pursued that and found those people guilty. Up to today, do you know the Supreme Court has not sentenced them? So it's not just the executive branch of government. The judiciary, the legislature are all involved in what we're doing in terms of frustrating what we should be doing. We look, for example, we also pursue the current sitting senator Milton Tete. We pursue him. He was prosecuted for economic crimes and for mismanagement of resources while he was superintendent of Samuel County. We took him to court. That will also tell you that a sitting lawmaker can also be taken to court. Under our laws, again, I would say the only person that can be prosecuted while they're in office is the president of the republic. So we took Milton Tete to court while he was still a senator, and he was found guilty. Milton Tete was made to restitute $50,000 United States dollars by the government coffers or go to jail. That happened. We also remember, and when peace be to actually the late Representative Adolph Lawrence, who was also arrested in the act, engaging in act of corruption in the bank. We arrested Adolph Lawrence, and he turned that money over to us, which went back to government coffers. So a lot of things need to happen. When laws are made, we need to make sure that the laws are enforced. This is one of Liberia's biggest weaknesses. It's one of we don't enforce the law. Instead, we intervene, we interfere to frustrate the execution of laws. And that is a big challenge. In terms of LCC, there are a lot of things that need to be done. The laws are there. For example, do you know that corruption as a crime is not designated on our law, in our criminal code? It's not. The acts of corruption are designated. That is why when somebody is accused of corruption, you have to either say it's embezzlement, is inside peddling, is fraud, is economic sabotage. To accuse the fraud and other kind, but to just accuse that you've committed corruption, we don't have no crime on our penal code called corruption. So the new judicial law needs to be amended so that it includes corruption itself as an act, as a criminal act. So the LCC law only designated those different areas, those things that are crime already under the law. They say, okay, these are the things that constitute corruption. So when you charge somebody for corruption, it has to be either embezzlement, fraud, economic sabotage, and those kind of things. That's another weakness in our law. That's a challenge right there. But one of the major challenges of the LCC is that it's underfunded. And government, from the time I got there, has not demonstrated enough confidence and commitment to fighting corruption by funding the LCC. It's not. LCC is under the UNCAC law, the United Nations to do on corruption. They specifically said that funds to support anti-corruption institution, National Commission for Corruption, should actually be set from the budget, the set of the budget. It should be designated by some percentage, maybe 2% of the total budget should go to LCC, or 1% or 0.99%. It should be stated in law so that nobody in the executive controls what the LCC, what the Anti-Corruption Commission gets. But that's not the case. The Minister of Finance, and then they decide what comes to LCC. Then they get to the legislature, and then they also have to decide whether they're going to grant it or not. And these are people that the LCC is investigating. How do you think they treat them? They do all they can to make sure that they disenfranchise the LCC from resources that they're supposed to have. One of the challenges I faced one time, and we actually got into a heated discussion with lawmakers, is that we have suggested that they provide support for intelligence. And they just refuse.
Right. And before you get to that, Councillor Verdier, you mentioned a name, Councillor Milton Tieje. He happens to be the senator from my county.
He's not a councillor. Milton Tieje is not a lawyer. He's a senator.
Yeah. No, sorry. Senator Milton Tieje. He happens to come from my county, right? So I'm very much interested. He was convicted, and he was asked to restitute the money, and he paid the 50,000. And that's it. It didn't affect his job as senator, because I'm looking at the other case involving Brownie Samukai. Because of his conviction, he's being prevented from taking a seat. Milton TJ was already in a seat, and nothing is done. I mean, what does the law say about that?
And this is where I come and say, look, it's not only the executive branch of government that in fighting corruption or should be fighting corruption. The three branches of government as well as the citizens. Under our laws, when somebody is convicted of offense and become a convict, they actually is at the level of legislation, they should be kicked out. So when Milton Terry was convicted, we took the judgment, sent a communication to the Senate, and attached that judgment to it. So one of you have been convicted of economic crimes or stealing money from his people that when he served as superintendent of San Luis County. So we suggest and recommend that the Senate does the needful to further penalize it. They received it and never acted. They didn't want to act. They never acted. But in the case of Brownie Samukai, I think from my personal view, there are two things involved. The Supreme Court came out with rulings and said that this man should be able to take his seat if he fulfills the restitution of certain amount of money, and I think he did. But the thing about the case is that he was not seated. He has not been seated, so he's not a sitting lawmaker as compared to Milton Tieje. But I think the Supreme Court needs to come up with a clear cut definition of what they want to happen. But that does not prevent the government from challenging Brownie Samukai taking the seat. They can do that. But what is the determination? The court needs to come up with and make that determination as to whether or not he can take his seat and can take his seat. What would be the legal basis for him not taking his seat or for him taking his seat? The Supreme Court is the one that should be telling what the case actually is. You know, in the case of Milton Tieje, he was convicted. While sitting as senator, he should have been removed. And he should still be removed from office. And on that basis, he should be kicked out because he's a convict.
Yeah. Mr. Cuffy, I'm coming to you. I think you are from Sino. Your face looks like Sino person. Your senator is being convicted. And so when we talk about corruption, we say, public official. But if the citizens that continue to vote for Mr. Tieje and continue to promote him, if they are promoting a convict, are they too having hand in corruption?
I mean, that is an act of encouraging corruption in the country. It's a bribery. The person who bribes and the person who received the bribe, they are both guilty, right? So the person who stifled the law from taking its place is also guilty, right? That is why you will see that, the United States government, for example, it's not wrong in the act it is doing for sanctioning people, right? You will see for example, in the Sherman case, that case was taken to court, and it was tried, and he was not guilty, right? But the U.S. government saw the need under their law to sanction him. So if he was in the U.S. to the extent that he had properties in the U.S., that his properties were confiscated, right? So if he was in the U.S., he would have, the case would have taken a different course, right? So you will also see why the U.S. is bringing a sanction against Prince Johnson, for example, because in our country, unfortunately, why the so that we have all these laws and all these institutions, and these institutions perform their duties, but these institutions do not work in isolation. They work as part of a system. And all we do is establish, make the law, establish the organization, hire people, they get paid, we talk. Nothing is done. The real stuff is not done. And then when other countries start to act upon our situation that we're living undone, then we say, oh, we're an independent country, oh, we're a sovereign nation, we're this, we're that. All right. So the other people have their own laws, like the United States have the Magnitsky Act, which covers, global situations on corruption and human rights abuses. So they can bring that to bear. If countries do not have, we have a situation where, when I was the head of the FIU, for example, we had a situation where certain serious cases, like I mentioned, like, terrorism cases and stuff like that, were not taken by the agencies that's supposed to do that. We had to act in our cooperation with other institutions, other countries. And those other countries brought sanctions against those institutions, right? Those other countries, including the US, including countries in West Africa. Our country failed to act. Those other countries acted. I traveled to some of those countries, and sometimes we don't talk some of these things because some of these things they are either specific cases or they're grave. But like if you're talking about terrorism, so
Mr. Cuffy, you say our country did not act. Who really could be acting when you say our country? Is it the legislator? Is it the president? Is it who?
So the National Security Agency, for example, is under the executive, right?
Right.
So it's the executive that will to act. And if there's something that attracts the legislative attention, then it's repatriated. But in this case, it's not a legislative thing. It's an executive. It was an executive situation.
So in the case of Milton Tiege, who is refusing now to act? Is it the citizen? Because the citizen bear responsibility. I go on Sign Up Forum and I see almost like a Tiege group, and I see a Zaza group, and these people are going back and forth.
But the citizen can bring
before Verdier comes in. Why it is true that the citizen can bring pressure to bear, but the laws should be there. The laws are clear, and the laws, those who are supposed to take, those who are supposed to, make the law work, they're supposed to make the law work. That's what we were elected. That's what we were appointed to do our work. And it's everybody has a piece of the pie. Nobody works in isolation. No institution works in isolation. So it's a piece of the pie. That's why they have executive branch. The executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. They all work together. For case to leave the executive to go to the judicial branch at court. And if the executive pass behind people and go and do something to kill the case, then we're not doing our work as a country.
Yeah.
And that is the problem. You want the citizens to continue to put pressure to demonstrate, and meanwhile we're beating them, we're wasting high water on them. So that only election will wait for to vote somebody out.
We should be respecting their rights to do that, and not abuse their rights. Look, what happens is elected officials or appointed officials don't do what they're supposed to do. Those who are appointed will expect that the appointed official will remove them. Those who are elected will expect that the people who elected you will bring pressure to bear on you, compel you to do your work. If you don't do it in the instant, then when you get to the ballot box, then you make sure you keep them out. That is the power that people have to keep a check on officials like those who are elected and not doing what they're supposed to do. For example, with the case of Milton Tiege, how can all of the senators sit in there up to now and they have not kicked Milton Tiege out? And they have laws on how to expunge or expel a member who has been convicted for crime. They have a law in the Senate to do that, but they choose not to do it. I don't know. There are a lot of them who are culpable for this. And besides that, we're talking about the morality of the people. How can you take a man in terms of Councilor Barney Sherman, who have been accused of a crime, and make him chairman of your judicial committee? Do you know that very Senate took Milton Tiege and made Milton Tiege chairman, or gave him what they call oversight responsibility over integrity institutions while he was being investigated by NCC and being prosecuted by NCC? Do you know that? Do you know that Milton Tiege had guts to actually sack NCC to a meeting to come and investigate NCC while we were prosecuting him? If it was not because of our leadership, we insisted and said we're not going to come to you, and we Milton Tiege actually going to preside over a process that administer our activity while we're prosecuting him. This shows how a different level of government, the people are corrupt. How do you do that?
Right.
Integrity, you know, and morality.
He was also accused of soliciting bribe from Wamudiki, and we'll come to the Wamudiki issue because later. But it brings me to the issue of the corruption perception index. You earlier, Mr. Councilor Verdier, you talk about the history. I know the print there is very small, but if you look at Liberia corruption perception index, from 2020 going back far back has 20
since 2012.
2012 from 2012 to
2020 there, yeah,
right. So the perception index there state that 0 meaning not corrupt. I mean 0 meaning corrupt and 100 not corrupt. Highly corrupt is from 0 to 100. So Liberia is 2020. Liberia is at 28. 2020 28 for 2019. 2018 is 32, and it goes on and on. From your looking at corruption in Liberia, how far have we come?
Wait, Dennis.
I think you have a little misinterpretation of the score.
It's over 180.
You know, when you mention the issue of 28 over 100 means that you're supposed to score 100. So 28 means you're failing. You're supposed to score 100. But if you look at the one that says 137 over 180, it means one being the least corrupt.
Yeah,
one being the least corrupt. So Liberia is down 137.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a poll conducted including 180 countries. So one being the least corrupt, you're coming from one all the way down to 137. That tells where Liberia is. And the score you're looking at 28 over 100, it means that we should be scoring 100 and we score 28. So we're actually failing miserably. We're not even 50%. Okay? So why is the perception in there? It basically tells you the level of perception that people have seen and the way people are convinced that a particular country is engaged in corruption or not engaged in corruption. And there are a whole lot of things that are involved in that perception index. People are interviewed on the ground.
My question, Councilor Verdier, is over time, how well are we doing in corruption? Are we going up or coming down?
We're retrogressing. It's getting difficult. You know, we are retrogressing. We're failing every time. Our school mark is reducing. We're getting worse and worse in corruption. That's what it's telling you.
Mr. Cuffy, why is that?
No, I was just trying to take a peek at what Jimmy Eastman wrote here. He was talking about the rank.
We'll come to the comments.
Okay. So why is that? For me, from my experience and as a Liberian, I think, people may argue left and right, but my thing is it's about leadership, right? Because it takes a leader to say, look, one of my core thing that I want to achieve is to ensure that I minimize corruption. You may not eliminate. As part of my 3-4 things I have to achieve during my leadership of this country, corruption, for me, if I was opportune to lead any institution or lead Liberia, corruption would be my number one thing that I would fight. Now I will not say Liberia. So it goes to leadership governance. We have governance systems. So when people say governance, yes, but it takes people to make the governance work. It takes that leader who will say, hey, the buck stops here. And if my mother or my father does something wrong, it will face the full force of the law. And once you can fight corruption in Liberia, and you can reduce corruption, you can minimize corruption, I believe that all these other things shall be added onto us. The governance part is there. Governance is there, but that corruption and that rule of law. And because corruption includes ensuring that the rule of law works, that a police officer will not just stop any test and identify that openly. And that corruption will not be on the table. Corruption cannot be, it may not be eradicated, so it's supposed to go on the table. It's not supposed to come on the table where the police officer, as simple as stopping the person to Joba Market and blocking the whole traffic because you won't get your father. And that's where corruption starts, that you will run on the other lane of the road, the tail lane, on the opposite lane, all the cars come here, you expect the cars to give you way. Why do you think people stop at the traffic sign in America? Even though police not there, you don't see no police around, but you stop. Because there's a system that works, that tells you if you cross that light and you are caught, you may not be caught, but when you are caught, you'll know the consequences.
Yeah. And
that is what we're lacking. That's what, what you call it, impunity is reigning, that people can do anything, nothing can happen to it. We got something they call the corruption triangle. The pressure. What causes somebody to want to corrupt? Maybe the person get a bigger family. Maybe the person get a habit to do this, to do with money. But what causes that person to be able to take government funds that don't belong to her? We create the opportunity because the impunity is so much. That's the opportunity. The old man went, then the justification. Oh, but John Brown did that thing last time, nothing happened to him. Peter did that thing last time, nothing happened to him. This other official did it, nothing happened to him. Oh, I got my brother, he is there. Oh, I got a connection with the president. Oh, I got a connection with the justice minister, so nothing will happen to me. So we continue in a vicious cycle, and it gets worse from government to government. So that's why I say leadership. Because when you're an astute leader, you make sure you appoint people who are also astute and hold them accountable and give them a mission that is part of your overall mission to achieve for your country and for its people. And corruption is one of the things you need to put under the table. So the monies that are coming from this corrupt activity, from all these investment, all this bribery, all these shell companies that we've created in our country, that government people have, they are conflicted with a conflict of interest, and some of them are the beneficial owners of these institutions that are milking the country, that you will put a stop to it. And you say, oh yeah, you're my friend. Oh. That's why the man that is standing there, James Verdier, he is my friend. But when he was on the board of director of the FIU, he was a guy who would put me to check most of the time we'll go to a board meeting. And when we come from that meeting, you say, Mama, you're my man, but we got to make sure it works. That's why I'm on your back. And before I have any board meeting, I have to go to him first to have a private meeting with him for to meet the minds. But still, that man, when we go to that meeting, he will change. Because he wants the right things to be done. And that's the kind of thing we need in Liberia.
Okay, let me go to Councillor Verdier. You know, you see the FIU boss was kind of exercised over that. On what in your, you say we are going backward, we are retrogressing. What caused it, and how can we fix that?
No, perception is perception, you know, and the way to confront perception is to do the opposite thing, and so that people will see the right thing. You know, people, they say one may not be corrupt, but it's important for people to perceive that you are not corrupt. You know, and the perception that we convey in the last few years in government has not been good at all. Has not been good. So you see the country will fail more and more. For example, there are a couple of things. And I'll mention people. For the president of Liberia, he became president, and within 6 months' time, he started to build estates. He built estates that he did not even include in his asset declaration. It took him almost 6 months to declare his asset. He did not live, or he has not lived by example. It's been 4 years now. Actually, nobody has declared assets since 2018. There should be asset declaration now. Asset declaration should have been declared because the Code of Conduct said 3 years. Every 3 years, if nothing important has happened, you have to declare your asset in 3 years. So the LSCC is actually supposed to be saying to us why people have not declared their assets. You know, two, you got government officials like Nathaniel McGee. For 33 years or more, he's living in Liberia and working in Liberia. He never built a house to the extent of $900,000. How could we earn $900,000, or how could a bank loan him $900,000? What is it? What the probability of him paying that loan back within 2 or 6 months? Look at Samuel Troy, who is Minister of Finance. Look at the access that the other officials in the Ministry of Finance that they're doing. The perception is not good. I'm not saying public officials cannot achieve or cannot own or cannot acquire property, but that's one thing that's important. And this is where at the time I was at LCC, Councilor Verdier Chairman, I had a very big argument because I was proposing a law that were actually pushing for a lifestyle audit of public officials. And Councilor Verdier Chairman was saying, no, I will not support that. You know, he was the chairman of the judiciary, so I will not support that because it would be actually be contending with the law against self-incrimination. And my argument was, look, if it's not everybody who has the opportunity to come to public office, when you have that privilege to come and serve in public office, you surrender certain right. So lifestyle audit is important because it tells you, it creates a solution where when a man or a woman acquires a property, a public official acquires a property, you are under duty to tell us how you got that property. You know, so the perception is not good. It's just not good. And sometime in 2018, President Weah publicly said he does not have the means to compel people to declare their asset. Now, how can a president say something like that when you exercise all that control and authority over members of the executive branch, and you say you cannot compel them to declare their asset? Look at the legislature. Up to present, up to me speaking right now, the legislature has not declared its asset to LSCC or the GAC. That's under the law. It's required. Nobody in the legislature has declared his or her asset to LSCC or the GAC. None have done it. The executive branch and the judicial branch declared the asset, but the legislature has not. It's been more than 16 or more years. The legislature has not been audited. How is that? When the financial law says all institutions that receive government funding should be audited every year, why is the legislature separated? Why are they not audited? We're talking about enforcement of our laws and the practices of public officials when they get to office. You know, and that's why we keep failing and failing. Nobody, I don't see who has been brought and have been held accountable since 2018, you know, or 2019 for corruption. Many of the cases are ending in limbo. There's this case involving the $25 million map of money, which Ellis Cuffy should know something about. That there were connections drawing the Ministry of Finance in direct contact with that money. Nothing has happened, including the several millions of Liberian that disappeared, but now they say, oh, the money was accounted for. But structures were broken. Why are we not holding people responsible? Why can't we bring the people must be seen taken to court? If we go to court and they are just, let's take for example in the local case. There was a case involving local where we took people to court and we went to court and the court said they were not guilty. Okay, at least that case and as corrupt as the circumstances were. But they must be seen taken to court and being prosecuted. The objective of prosecution is not always to find somebody guilty, it's just to make sure the ends of justice is met.
Good. Councilor, let me bring in few things. I want us to look at some cases here. I know we talked about the Milton TJ case. We mentioned the Brownie Samukai and Verdier Sherman. There was a case involving, I don't know if he succeeded you directly, Wambo Dickey, who the guy at the head of the LSCC who didn't even have papers, actual naturalized paper to be a Liberian, yet he was serving in a capacity where he should be a Liberian. We also see that the LSCC itself was caught with Kanayo Bala and the Buchanan port manager and all that case. quite recently we saw the case of Deveta Brown Lasana at the NEC boss. That case is like it's being already prosecuted, and you could see that there were other cases before this one. So from the perspective of the LACC, how functional, how transparent, and how straightforward is this body? Because if you look at these cases that I named, including the one that involved the LACC deputy, these are not being investigated, and now we see that the David Ethel Brown case has been so fast-tracked. What's going on here? Is it interference, or what's responsible?
It's tough for me to speak for the current LACC. I can just speak now as just another Liberian for us, even though with the expert background involving corruption. But the case involving the current vice chairperson of LACC, Kando Bala, I recall that his case was investigated and was forwarded to the Ministry of Justice. I think after a week or two, the Ministry of Justice forwarded that case back to LACC and said you can handle your own situation. That is my recollection on that. And I think that the report, even though it was not published, I've not seen it, but I don't think the report was saying that there was evidence of conflict of interest or corruption. I think basically that's what it was saying. So the Ministry of Justice actually sent that case back to LACC involving Kando Bala. And the case involving Wambodigi, Wambodigi was at the Government Commission, and then he was nominated to the LACC. I know he struggled to get confirmed to go to LACC. It took some time, and finally, I think after some under dealings and whatnot, the Senate finally confirmed him. And then the president tried to send him to the election commission. But why he was at LACC, I don't know what is the question about him, but I know there was a lot of issues why he was at LACC, and there was issues about his character, before going to LACC, why at the time he worked with the United Nations mission in Liberia. I think there was a lot of issues with that. So they actually found him to be a man who was not honest, a man who didn't have integrity to occupy the kind of position, and then I think it got worse when the president tried to send him to the election commission, and then his whole issue of nationality came to play. And you could see the fraud that was committed, by him, because he presented documents indicating that 3 different birthdays, had 3 different passports with 3 different birthdays, and then saying he was admitted. I mean, he became citizen at 2 different times, and all of that. And so I think because of that, he had to resign. He was forced to resign. I don't think it was the pleasure of the president, that Wambodigi had to resign, but based on public pressure. I think Wambodigi has been seen as a confidant of the president who was going to do things for the current government. So I'm sure they were sad that he had to go.
But that fraud was never prosecuted, as far back as my recollection of him.
I don't think it was myself. If there was an element of fraud, and who were bringing the charges? Say the government, in those kind of agreement, or is it LACC themselves? That's something that they're supposed to be able to say. What LACC were bringing charges against Wambodigi for fraud? Who was alleging the fraud? When it got to the Supreme Court, I think the Supreme Court has banned Wambodigi from the practice of law. I don't know for how long, but somebody is supposed to bring that charge of fraud. If the Ministry of Justice is alleging fraud, then they're supposed to bring that. If it's LACC, they're supposed to do that. You're right, but nothing has been done about it. They were clearly, the Bar Association investigated that, and the Bar Association actually established the issue of fraud. So I don't know whether the government is intending to bring charge against Wambodigi for that. I am not sure. But those are some of the things we're talking about. They need to take some action in that direction.
Right.
Now, go to the current situation. I see people are already back-morphing LACC for bringing charges against the current NEC chairperson. I mean, they have not brought the case to court, but she's being charged, for conflict of interest. I think I say for money laundering or something, but conflict of interest. That under our laws, the conflict of interest thing is basically an restricted action that's supposed to be taken. But the LACC in this case is acting correctly because of the issues involved. There's an issue of tendering contract to a company that has the NEC chairperson, 2 brothers heading. That is definitely a conflict of interest, and that is wrong. and that requires administrative action to penalize somebody for something like that. But the LACC acted correctly by investigating and then coming up with a charge and charging them for conflict of interest. I think they said money laundering too, so they need to
money laundering and conflict of interest. But the question there is, why is it at the top? What's wrong with the other cases that happened before?
The case is not at the top. It's going for indictment. It doesn't mean the case is being tried. After the indictment and they will post a bill, and for the charges they have, the charges are available offenses. So they post a bill and then they will set a trial date. A trial date has not been set. What they're doing right now is to bring up to court so that should be indicted. Formally charged at court. That's what happened. That's not a trial. You get indicted and somebody's case will come up 6 months, 9 months after.
Mr. Cuffy, it goes to this whole idea of perception. People are now looking at the LACC favorably now. So with the NAC boss case, with the Canayo Bala case and all that, people are thinking, is it something they're up to? There are people who are questioning whether the LACC is acting correctly in this manner.
Well, what Dennis, what I would say there is, there is a level of sycophancy that I see, because you can't have an institution that is supposed to be responsible for these things. Then it seems to be there is cherry picking, right? It seems as though when it favors us, then we rush there quick, then we act like we're investigating, then we acquit the person at that level. And we've seen some few cases like that. We who have those eyes, we can see, and even the general, it doesn't take rocket science to know that. For example, in the case of the National Transit Authority situation, you can see that there was a situation to give the guy a free pass and all right, and then we'll see other situations like that. The cases involving, there's something they call beneficial owner. The cases involving the company that was given the contract at Buchanan Port, there's beneficial ownership situation in there. There are conflicts of situation and conflict of interest situation in there, right? The ownership of a company, the thing we're talking about, there's a shell company situation in there where you form the company for the purpose. And that's money laundering too, to siphon government money through that vehicle of a company, all right? So why it is true that you're proceeding correctly on the case of the NAC boss, because there's this perception that, elections that are being held on a strict situation, all right? And we can't which is the perception out there. At the same token, you're leaving some cases that you're supposed to really handle on the table. And you are giving people passing certificate, when cases actually should be brought. And one of the cases, like I repeat, is the case involving the Buchanan Port situation. Who told you, say, the guy who left the country, who told you, say, there are not vehicles to get him to account? There are vehicles to get him account. But because there are other hands involved, so we have the mechanism in Liberia to get that guy to account for his crime. We have the mechanism in Liberia, the legal mechanism. All right? They're not through the LACC, through the FIU. We have those mechanisms in place. But again, when you have beneficial ownership, when you have a shell company situation, when you have a beneficial ownership situation, when you have conflict situation that involve other people who are close and who have closer proximity to the power that be, then there's a problem. So you research the case. So that's why I call it cherry picking. I do not disagree that the LACC is proceeding correctly in this one case.
It's a difficult solution to win, because in as much as you say cherry picking, but the LACC is pursuing in this case, and then we're having problem with that because there are other cases that are leaving behind to pursue this other matter. Why can't all the cases be pursued concurrently or together? Why would we think that they're not pursuing them? That, again, it's a perception issue. But with all due respect, whether there are several cases, I agree that they should be pursuing right now. But I think with the NEC case, they're acting correctly and they're acting in a timely manner. They should do that and try to resolve it.
Yeah, but
let's
Councillor Verdier, you should proceed in all cases with the same width and might. You shouldn't choose one, even though I know, for example, in the law, correct me if I'm wrong, there are certain cases that the court will hear right away, for example, in a murder case or in a rape case, right? Other cases, like, Percy larceny or other small thing can stay yet. Why is those other big cases here? But this national election case is not grave, then it's not petty, or it's not higher than the Buchanan-Port case.
Sometimes it's the time they take to amass evidence. Sometimes in other cases, you get evidence very quick, and you're able to proceed. There's no criminal case you're going to prosecute successfully if you don't have credible evidence. And in those cases that you have credible evidence, you proceed with them as quick as possible. Maybe that may be the case. I'm not speaking for them, but as I'm saying, they can proceed concurrently with all the cases. But the cases that you see people push forward, are cases where we're convinced or they're convinced that have credible evidence to prosecute.
Thank you. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll read comments. But let's look at this picture. Is this part of corruption? But don't give me an answer. When we come back, we'll delve into it.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia. From education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jah.
But Councillor Verdier,
Yes, sir.
so I will play a host here a little bit. So
before you play the host, tell me if this is corruption.
Oh my God, the voters,
Okay.
the rich politician.
You see two flower pots here. The poor is watering the the rich politician said he or she is watering the poor flower, but the water went back to the politician. But anyway, that was a teaser. Go ahead, Mr. Make a comment so we can bring in our comments.
In these cases, for example, in the, those are not good examples, but let me just give it for the sake of the conversation. In a water and sewer case, for example, the person was suspended, right? So I'm trying to, what should happen in the NAC, in the National Election Commission case? Should the person be in the position? All these different things. Once you go for, LACC boss.
I think, Alex, there may not be a clear-cut situation, but what is expected that if a high government official, public official, is accused of committing a crime, act of corruption, and there is an indictment, and that person is charged, that person should be suspended from office until after the trial, or they can be dismissed depending on the grave nature of the case. Some evidence are so credible that you can't even. I'll give you an example. That's something I know about involving MPA, the Woki Parker case. The evidence against Madam Parker and Madam Pele, the controller, were grave and so credible that you could not ignore it. So she was relieved for our position, eventually. So in a case like this, there's suspension until pending trial, until this person goes through trial. But this requires some administrative action. It requires administrative action. But I just want to continue talking about how these cases are brought. I am not denying that some of these cases get stuck somewhere. Some of these cases are accelerated based on interest so that they can end. This is one thing. Another thing that bothers our government. The judiciary is not absolved from responsibility here. You have an issue of corrupt judges. You have an issue of corrupt court officials. You go to the Temple of Justice, you have jurors who are soliciting jurors. The jurors come and actually solicit money from party litigants. So the case comes to court, the jurors get money, they get bribed, and they declare somebody not guilty, even though the evidence are very strong. I also mentioned one time, there was a case we took to court involving FPRC managing director, where the judge was actually lashing out at NSCC for bringing the case to court. The judge, and said that the people were not corrupt because these people had asked for bench trial. In bench trial, you don't have a jury; it's really the judge. And the thing behind it is that people say, why it's easier to bribe one person than to bribe 12 persons, and that's very common in Liberia. So when people bring these cases to court, they bring these cases to court. Sometimes the evidence are not too strong, so you wait and keep looking for evidence. In those cases where the evidence is strong, you want to push it as quick as possible. But also, interest is also involved. The patronage is so much in Liberia that some cases come up and then I'll give you another example. And I'm sure this is still happening. NSCC sends a case to the Ministry of Justice, and the NSCC law says the Ministry of Justice has 90 days to look at the case before deciding whether to prosecute it with NSCC or not to prosecute it. But gentlemen, I tell you that 2 days after we send the case to the Ministry of Justice, the defendants, the accused in that already received a report. They're already making their departure. We can't stop them because the Ministry of Justice still hold the case. So they leave the country. They have gone.
Yeah. All right.
Sometimes the witnesses leave. They bribe the witnesses leave. And when you responded to keep the case from the Ministry of Justice after 90 days, all of your witnesses that you line up, key witnesses, can be found. They're gone. How do you prosecute that case? So there's something wrong with that law in terms of proceeding. There's something wrong with the law. And this should have to investigate and prosecute directly.
And that's why when they keep saying the laws are on the books, I don't believe all that, right? I think there are some laws that are not on the books. To that, William Dunbar is asking, is there really a law in Liberia today? Or let me put that to say, is there a law on corruption in Liberia today?
There are laws. There are laws on corruption in Liberia, yes. Our problem is that we're not enforcing the laws that are there. They can be strong. We can actually make them stronger, but the laws that are there currently, we can still proceed with those laws.
Jerome Gilman said, is failure to prosecute corruption in itself corruption?
The person asking is Verdier corruption. He has no history of successfully convincing anyone. I don't know.
I'm only asking on the first part of it because
I think it meant convicting.
But maybe when I answer, when I tell him that I convicted people, we convicted Monassia, we convicted the NDS, the National Drug Services, Nigerian Director, we convicted Brighton TJ. I wanted this kind of information will convince him that I'm serious. But there are laws on corruption.
Kim Kanye said FIU is not doing its job then because corruption in Liberia is an easy game that many are doing without imprisonment.
But Kim, FIU is not the institution that is responsible for handling corruption. So LACC is
I think Kim is mixing the two up.
Yeah, LACC is the institution that is, But I'm just correcting her. But corruption, the fight against corruption is a wholesome thing. It's something that the entire nation and all the different institutions, including the court, the legislature, the executive, have to fight. They have to be serious to fight. If they're not serious to fight it, no one institution can work in isolation. For example, the FIU does its analysis and determine from its purview which act is being committed. If it's corruption, it sends a case to LACC. If it's tax evasion, if it's terrorism, it sends it to NSA. Those people are supposed to investigate and send it to the court. So it's a whole value chain. If one person filter along the line, the same thing happens in other countries. It happens in America, it happens in Ghana, it happens in Britain. It's it's a connection, because even if you took a case by yourself as an individual and go sue somebody, you got to deal with the court. You got to deal with the police.
So, for example, if somebody came and steal something, you report to the police. If the police is bribed from behind you, the police will kill your case. They will not do anything. For example, even if the police pick up the case, the police have to write the case and send it to the court. So it's a whole connection of things that have to happen, and that thing happening by way of serious leadership that is ready to govern a country properly, that makes sure that all the governance structure work.
All right, we got some callers lined up, but let me bring in a few comments here. Paul Poto said there is a need to point out a particular government because some of the reasons why politicians and citizens go for a change in government corruption is a factor for some of the changes. Willie Dillon said, why is the Liberian FIU not a member of the Edmond Group of Financial Action Task Force? Alex, please jot that down. Other questions here. Mohammed Donzo say, dishonesty is what continues to hold Liberia backwards. The fact that the current government refused to conduct an audit for the past leadership, I think it was a prelude to what we are observing today about corrupt practices. Watson said, corruption starts with the leader. When the head is corrupt, what do you expect the common people will do? Ishmael said, can LACC call to book all government officials out the current president order? I don't understand it. Can LACC call to book all government officials out the current president order? I don't get it. Will membership in those organizations help to mitigate corruption in Liberia? Alex, you take that one. While you are thinking about it, let me bring on Mr. Bullet Wifa. There's a question on the caller, your name and where you calling from. Caller, you got to mute your Facebook and your name and where you calling from. Okay. Go ahead, Alex, and answer the question from.
Yeah, let me come back to Steve. Steve talked about, Steve is right, and if you don't have a leadership, if you have a leadership, that it's not serious, it's corrupt, it's allowing things to happen. They say charity begins at home. So what you do, your children will follow, right? And then they will think it's okay because daddy is doing the same thing. Now, Willie talked about the FIU being part of the ECMON. Yes, it's a good thing for all FIUs to be part of the ECMON group of FIUs, but there are criteria that any country FIU is supposed to meet. All right. For example, yeah, you are autonomous in terms of your law and other stuff, but one of the things is local financial autonomy. All right. Can the institution have its own budget and run with it? For example, in Liberia, for some of the institution, you have to be able to say, okay, that a budget deal, but you're supposed to be able to, maybe on a quarterly basis or on a semi-annual basis, you're supposed to forward the people budget money to the account so that they can be able to operate. Do they have sufficient resource to operate? Good. Also, you got to look at the law, the strength of the law. Some of these laws, we did them quickly because we're under pressure. They needed revision. And when I was there, we started our revision. To date, those laws, those revised laws, they have been spearheaded by African Development to some extent, World Bank to some extent, but World Bank got to say, oh, you got to give us the budget support. When you don't do this, when you don't move the law to the next level, we're not getting the budget support. Then we do it quick. Then we get the money. But the laws have not been passed yet. So, and all those things are part and parcel that the ECMON criteria has. That Liberia has not really attained with respect to the FIU yet. And until then, the FIU may not be able to qualify to be part of that unique. The uniqueness of that allow you with a database that have all the cases that you can trace. And it gives you also that power to be able to take information, share information with any FIU in the world, Poland, whatever. Right now, as it is, we have to look for intermediary to do our information sharing. Except in West Africa, we can do our information sharing freely because we are part of JABA. But outside of West Africa, it gets tough. We have to go through another West African country who is a member of ECMO, like Ghana or Nigeria, before we process
Thank
our.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jimmy Eastman said, although the basic elements of an anti-corruption legal framework are in place, corruption is rife. The written laws of Liberia are not fully implemented by government, and officials often engage in corrupt practices with impunity. United States Department of State.
We share that view. We said it over and over. But one of your guests actually, the comments down below actually said was asking whether the LACC can actually pursue a former government official for corruption without the current president's order. So that's what they're asking. And the answer to that is yes, LACC can pursue anybody. The president actually should not be dictating to LACC who to pursue. LACC is an independent, institution. They should pursue people based on their investigation and the evidence that they have. So the LACC can pursue former government official without the president saying anything.
Oh, the with is not there. That's why I couldn't understand. Without the current government. Yeah. Let's take one caller on the call. I think that's Jimmy Eastman from the nation's capital. Jimmy, you're live.
Yes, Mr. Ja, very, very good discussion tonight. I really appreciate Mr. Cuffy and Mr. Verdier. Look at Mr. Verdier get his wall face on tonight. I like that and I appreciate that. But I have one question. There was one case regarding the not the refinery, but the oil company in Liberia, where they pursued a case and they found someone guilty. I think a relative of the president, guilty of millions of dollars of theft. And after they found that person guilty, the president absorbed the responsibility. My question to them, first of all, is that legal? Can somebody absolve the guilty? Or what should have been the follow-up procedure after such a declaration was made?
Thank you. And Councilor Verdier, Bill is asking you, say, where are you? I really want to see you. Well, go ahead with Jimmy's question.
Jimmy, thanks for the comment, but my recollection posted in 2 instances I referred to, there was never a case that was fully adjudicated and then the president absorbed the responsibility. That case you're talking about, I think, is just an investigation that was ongoing at Cllr. That investigation was not concluded, but there was noise and there was concern about corruption at Cllr. And the president came out and said that she takes responsibility for what was happening at Cllr. But there was not a case taken to court. The case involving Cllr that was taken to court involved the board members of Cllr, former board members. And even though they were about to find them guilty, but the only thing that the court relied on was that the defendant petitioned the court and said that LACC was out of order because the case was brought more than 5 years after the GAC report. And it was on that basis, that technical basis, that case was dismissed for what we refer to as statute of limitation. And that case actually started long before I got to LACC. And so when I got to LACC, I saw that case on the shelf and we decided to pursue it. But then it had been more than 5 years after GAC made that report. And on that basis, the court actually dismissed that case involving the former Cllr board of directors.
And this one, you can continue with this one. Can a LACC pursue a structural failure of finance minister about the 25 million mop-up exercise?
I'm sure if in the report, and I think that question should go to Ellis because Ellis was involved in the study. Ellis was involved in that committee. The committee pointed out some deficiency, some issue of accountability that pointed to the Ministry of Finance and the central bank governor. That $25 million markup, but nothing happened. I know personally, I read report from the committee that investigated that, where they said certain peddlers, certain merchants were listed as people who received some of the markup money. And LACC investigator actually interviewed those people and they disclaimed receiving any money. So there was some criminal action. people were named as people who received or who were recipient of the money, and they declare that they were not. So there's something wrong there. Yeah, I think the Minister of Finance that should be held responsible along with others.
Mr. Cuffy?
So as you saw, the two aspects of the case, the 16 billion and the 25 million, right? So let me say that the two went hand in hand, all right? So some people think that, oh, the 25 million should not have been included and other stuff in the public space, or those who were culpable in the report felt that, oh yeah, the report, the 25 million should not have been included, or that the person caused it to be there because the person has motive and other stuff. No, that is not true. The investigators decided that the things go together because there were intelligence that led to that decision being made. There were credible intelligence that led that money laundering was being conducted as a result of the unaccounted for portion of the 16 million that it was floating, and then this 25 million map up process. Some of that monies were used to bring to the market to in exchange for those monies. So that is why the 25 million became part and parcel. To make it simple, there were some of the 16 billion, all the 16 billion they now lost, continual money they now lost. But there was some money as the reports found out, and people were taking the quote that there was some part of that money, 1.something billion, was unaccounted for, right? And that money might have been in people's hand. And people may have used that money, money launderers may have used that money to bring that money to the market, to use that money to exchange for some of the mop-up money. That is why you will note that some people addresses, their phone number could not be verified. Some people denied, like Verdier said. Okay. So that is why it was important to include the 25 million as part of the investigation. All right.
Thank you.
Now, the conclusion on the 16 billion was that, you know that people went to court. The conclusion on the 25 million that the investigator needed, because as a country, we needed to take responsibility for our report. The US government contracted the crew.
Yeah.
And the US government was about to issue their report. And we as a country, through the president of Liberia, decided to take ownership to issue our report before the US government. So that the US government, we are a sovereign state, so the US government should not take ownership of this. So we decided as a government, led by the president, to issue our report before. But there were certain things that were inconclusive on the 25 million that we needed to do further investigation. We needed more resources to do some forensic investigation, to confirm signatures, to do all kinds of stuff. Unfortunately, when we issued that report, unfortunately, you saw how it ended up. They took it from the investigator. At one point, they gave it to LACC. They took it from LACC. They gave it to GSC. This is investigation. It had nothing to do with GSC. GSC at that level, because GSC does its work and send it to LACC and send some of its work to even at FIU for investigation. So it's the investigators that were supposed to continue their work.
Right. So can the LACC
forensic work and come up with the real findings to see what action be able? But in the meantime, based on the finding, the president could have taken administrative actions.
Can the LACC do anything
on their head? Even with the report as is, the president could have issued administrative action based on the content of the report on account of the 25 million. The president could have suspended people. The president could have warned people. The president could have slapped some people on the wrist to any action he could have taken.
Right. So the question here is it completely out of the hands of the LACC, or can they do anything?
Well, you know that it was taken to the LACC, then you're taken back from the LACC to the GSC, then the GSC completed the report, then they send it back to the LACC. Because at the end of the day, the LACC is an investigation arm. It's not a GSC. The GSC should not have been.
I know. So it's back in the
That was a way. That was a way of avoiding a direct action. So they were actually laundering the report amongst institutions and putting institution at loggerhead, making institution rivals. But the LCC can still pursue that 25 million.
That's my question. So
The
quickly,
LCC can pursue it.
But be as a may, some of the findings of the GSC were also, in consonant with what the PIT said, the report said.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the executive can still do something. Last question here.
And I can tell you that even the GSC, I can tell you for a fact that GSC had to seek guidance from the PIT in pursuing his work.
Councillor Verdier, you talk about a lifestyle audit for public officials. How can citizens pursue that?
I see the question, but there was not a bill. I said that's something that Councillor Vice Chairman and I were discussing, and we actually didn't come to terms on, but we're trying to introduce it. We had to discuss it with him first, and then in the process, Vice Chairman got charged for corruption and all of that. So that whole thing just broke down. But that's something that we need that can still be pursued.
How can we move forward with it?
The executive branch of government, LCC can do a bill and have that bill go to the president, so the president can send it to the investigation. But
what can the citizens do?
The citizens can also pressure their legislature, the representatives, the senators also to enact put a bill together that will talk about lifestyle audit. Citizens are ready to do that. So some senators can sponsor the bill, right? The senators or representatives can sponsor the bill.
Thank you so much. In the next 4 minutes, we'll be closing. But before we close, we have a few things here to take care of. Ghana Cash is the way for you to send money to Africa. So send your money to Liberia is fast, it's easy, and it's safe. You can go to your Google Play Store or your Apple App Store to download. Sending money is you enter the amount, you choose your recipient, you choose the payment method, you review that, you confirm it, and boom, the money is gone. So please, if you're in doubt, call Spencer Beer, the office here, 800-933-7871. On Tuesday, we're going to have a mock interview of President Joseph Newman Boakai on the Hour of Politics. And guess what? I will be playing Joseph Newman Boakai. You don't want to miss it. Again, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for coming tonight. Let's go around the room now and get your closing comments. And we talk about corruption, how bad it is and how it ties with human rights. I want you to conclude, solution. What can we do? Is the situation hopeless? Are we helpless as a people? How can we fight corruption and defeat this nemesis? Let me start with Mr. Cuffy.
Look, like I said, Dennis, corruption has become, so much, it has permeated our society in the ways that you can believe that, monies that are supposed to be directed for development, for education, for healthcare is going to corruption, and people are channeling some of this money into real estate. Some people are moving these monies, through the system, through the banking system across the border from the country, and this is hampering our country. Is even distorting some of our economic narratives and things like that. So I think the issue for me is, yes, while you may argue that governance, but the issue is leadership. It's leadership at the highest level, at the top, at the presidency. It's leadership. And once we have leadership, good leadership actually that is ready to fight, that is ready to roll up the sleeve, and a leader who is not, there, who is really to serve the people and not the people serving. We saw that happening in liking or hating. We saw that happening in Ghana under Gerald Rawlings. Today, Ghana is an enviable place. We saw that happening we see that happening in he has his flaws, but we see that happening with Paul Kagame in what the country name
Rwanda.
in Rwanda. You saw that happen with the late Machiavelli. You saw that happen in Philippines. I think Philippines or somewhere. So you see that happening with other countries. So for me, the thing is a leader who is willing to make sure that the governance structure that we have work, that make sure that the rule of law work, that is ready to fight corruption for the benefit of the people of Liberia. And we can only get that through choosing the right leaders at the executive, at the legislature, choosing the right representative, choosing the right senators, and choosing the right president.
Thank you. Councillor Verdier?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I don't think all is lost. There are a lot of things that we need to do, and we can start taking the very first steps. I will come on this what Alex just said, that leadership is very important. In our country, the president of the republic needs to lead by example. He needs to take some actions, and then that action should filter into the legislators and should filter into the judiciary as well. There are a couple of things we need to do. We need to make sure our laws are enforced. We need to start respecting the laws. We need to start patronizing people. We need to start concealing our friends when they are held or they are found to be guilty. Then we need to strengthen our laws. The current laws are there. They're there, but some of them are weak. We need to strengthen those laws. For example, I understand that the president submitted a bill to the legislature to grant LACC direct power to prosecute. That is a step in the right direction. I don't know whether that has been approved, but once that is done, then LACC needs to be supported financially, and morally to make sure that she can execute this duty. We need to start respecting all of our laws. We need to start dismissing people. We need to start suspending people who are accused of corruption. And at the same time, we need to start respecting the rights of our citizens. We have a lot of our citizens who, when they assemble, and right now, Liberia does not have political prisoners. But that doesn't mean Liberia has the greatest respect for human rights. Look at the number of deaths, suspicious deaths that have been reported. People have been deprived of their loved ones, their relatives. They need to be investigated. Or most of the cases are unsolved, and some of them are giving very controversial conclusions, which is not very good. We have to respect the rights of our citizens, the right to live. We have to respect their right to pursue happiness. We have to respect our right to good health and all of those kind of things. And we can do that by taking just simple steps. The budget, for example. So we talk about health. How much money is going to health? How much money is going to education? We declare free education, at the tertiary level. And now you have the University of Liberia not able to sustain itself. Students are sitting now in classroom with leaking water pouring while it's raining. It's terrible. We need to go back on that whole thing about free education again and empower those institutions and subsidize those institutions and allow those institutions to actually create a solution where students can start paying some money that will empower the institution to be able to operate. So there are a lot of things we need to do, but we need to start taking the very first and small steps, respecting our laws. For now, the president of Liberia should declare his asset. It's about time that he really declare his asset. I don't know what LACC is doing. LACC is going to be pursuing that, and the president should make sure that members of the executive branch declare their assets after 3 years. All of them supposed to declare their asset. I know at one point in time we pressured the president, but our president said even we were there to make sure that members of the executive did not receive their salaries until all of them declared. So they had to come to LACC for clearance before they were actually paid. Those are actions that the president can do, and require the code of conduct also need to be respected. It's about time they can go back to the code of conduct. The code of conduct has some very beautiful things in it, but we have to respect it and make sure that it's enforced. We have to show that we can execute our own laws and not wait for our international partners and friends to act before we start acting. We can execute our own law, and let's try to do that. We don't wait for America to sanction people before the people sitting right before our eyes, and we can conduct investigation and prosecute them ourselves. We don't need to wait for international community to do that. But this requires a bold leadership. And this is about time we call the president of Liberia to take this bold action, and stay away maybe from other things they're singing and Christmas messages that he's sending, and take some real serious action and become a real man and president and lead our country. We need that. I can see that. But this is serious. Well, our country is going down the drain. We're suffering and people are suffering. Our economic situation is worse. We need to focus in 2023, come in and say, 2022, and say, look, these are the things that we have to take the bull by the horn. Let's call a spade a spade. We are suffering from leadership. It's not late. The president can come back because he was elected popularly. He needs to deliver to the people. Corruption was one of the major things he campaigned on. He needs to make sure he can keep it in the bond. People have to be held responsible. People with full cycle. And to do that, to hold people responsible, he has to hold himself responsible. He has to explain how he managed to acquire some of the wealth that he has right now. So there are a lot of things we need to do, but we need to take the first step. I really thank you for the opportunity. I hope the intent, like we discussed, is not just to criticize, but also to provide awareness, to educate, to let people understand the circumstances and solution behind certain things that we do. I think this show provided that opportunity. Was good. Appearing with my dear brother, Mr. Cuffy. I want to say he kind of gave me a pat on the back by telling me what I did to him at FIU. Now he understands how serious I was about, even though he's my friend, but also accountable when I had to, to have oversight over his responsibility. I appreciate you mentioning that, and I hope other people can understand that in our little ways, whatever little position we have, we can demonstrate integrity, we can demonstrate leadership, we can demonstrate commitment to our country. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, and please keep your phone lines open. You're going to be hearing from me to come back as many times as possible. On behalf of all of us here at Focus on Liberia, we want to say thank you so much. This is the last edition of Primetime Sunday for the year. We want to thank all our viewers who follow us throughout 2021. As we go into 2022, expect big things from us as we attempt to educate, to elevate, and promote all things Liberia. Until then, we're going to end with our song that says, we are all Liberians. Corruption is a human rights issue. If you steal money from people that's supposed to benefit them, it means that hospital in Feasible will not be built. That pregnant woman who's supposed to have a prenatal care is not going to have that. You are depriving people of the dignity of human life. That is wrong, and people should be held accountable. Remember the corruption triangle that Mr. Cuffy talked about? The opportunity is there. You rationalize it, and then there is pressure. Let's do our best to make Liberia the best it can be. We are all Liberians, and that's the message we have for you today. Good night, and God bless you.
We are Liberians.